and organizations you see listed on the opening slide. Hopefully you're seeing my slide at this point. We're going to walk through this presentation tonight. This presentation is being recorded, so if you miss any part, we will be sending you a link to the recording, so you can always come back and watch it again at your leisure. We do invite you to watch and take notes as we go. You may find it helpful to have another screen open where you actually step through the FAFSA as we go through the form tonight and actually try to answer it as we go and answer the questions as we go. Or you may find that it's more helpful just to sit back and watch the process and then try it yourself subsequently after this evening. I will say there are a number of folks who are standing by behind the scenes to answer questions as we go. So feel free to use the Q&A section of the webinar. Please, while chat is open, we will not be monitoring the chat section for questions. We ask you please to put your questions in the Q&A section. That's where we will look to see if there are questions and answer your questions from there. In addition, you may have questions that you'll see are answered as we go through the presentation. My advice is if you have a burning question, wait a second, see if I get to it. If I don't, then please feel free to ask it, and we can certainly help you with whatever question you may have. So again, feel free to use that Q&A box as you have a question as we go through tonight. So first of all, welcome to the beta FAFSA. So I want to talk a little bit about what that means when I say beta FAFSA. While the FAFSA is not yet open for the 26-27 year for everyone as a final release, the Department of Education did open up for a beta testing. And that beta testing allows the department to see how the form works in a real situation. This is a real form. It's the same form you would have to complete anyway. The Department of Education has promised that it will go live by October 1. So in a sense, you're getting a 2-week head start by completing the form tonight. You'll have a chance tonight to actually complete the full form, do the full application, and get that solved. It is the same application you would do after October 1. There is no difference. So what that means is you'll have a chance to get your application done, be able to actually be first in line for limited funds that might be available. And you can go ahead and list schools now that you're thinking of applying to for admission, even if you haven't applied for admission yet. So this is also important. When you do the FAFSA tonight or tomorrow night or whenever you do it, please note that you don't have to have applied for admission already to list a school on the FAFSA. It can be just a list of schools you're thinking about applying to. And you can list up to 20 colleges on the FAFSA application. If you're thinking of applying to more than 20, I'll explain what to do for that situation as well tonight. So there are really 3 steps when you complete your FAFSA, and we're going to go through the 3 steps this evening. The very first step is to create what's called your FSA ID. That FSA ID is, and when you hear the term FSA, it is Federal Student Aid. So that Federal Student Aid ID is your combination of a login, it's a username and a password, to get into the federal aid system. And we'll talk a little bit more about that FSA ID. Every student needs to have their FSA ID. And once you have one, you can use it for all of the years that you apply for federal financial aid. You can also use it to access your records if you borrow a loan or anything related to your federal student aid. Once you create that FSA ID, you can then log in and complete, the student will, their section of the FAFSA. We'll go through that tonight. And then step 3 is that a parent or if a student is married, their spouse will log in and complete their section of the FAFSA and submit the form in total. And we'll go through all of this process this evening as we step through the FAFSA together. So what is that FSA ID? The FSA ID is, as I said, a combination of a username and a password, and it's unique to each individual. So a student will have an FSA ID, and at least one of their parents will have a separate and different FSA ID. If, as a parent, you've already completed a FAFSA, either for yourself or for maybe the student's sibling, you already have your FSA ID. You can use it again when you complete tonight on the FAFSA. But it does require a separate email address for every person who receives one. So you can't share an email address and share an FSA ID. It is required that each user have a separate FSA ID. So if you're going to be a contributor of information to the FAFSA, and all students are going to be one, you need to register for that FSA ID. And where you begin is on the webpage studentaid.gov. So I'm going to open up my web browser and just show you very quickly. Here we are at studentaid.gov. If you never created an account, you'll just simply click on Create Account. And once you do that, you can actually go through, and there's a series of questions that will walk you through how to create your account. We're not going to go through those tonight because that would take a little bit of time. But if you missed this, we did host a webinar. Whoop, be back up a second. We did host a webinar walking through how to complete an FSA ID. And what I will do is I will paste this link in the chat. You can certainly go back and take a look at that webinar. We go step by step through how to create an FSA ID, and we talk through all the various steps in that. And you can certainly feel free to watch that and do that at your leisure. Again, you should go ahead and create your FSA ID first because you'll need it to sign your FAFSA. It's really important. And once your FSA ID is created, you can immediately begin to work on your FAFSA. And now I realized I jumped in so quickly, I never really introduced myself. So let me back up a second and tell you who I am. So my name is Daniel Barkowitz, and I am Assistant Vice President of Financial Assistance and Student Employment at the University of Miami. And I'm here tonight talking about the FAFSA process. We have colleagues and friends of mine who are behind the scenes from lots of other institutions, including FIU, Florida Atlantic, Broward College, and others who are helping us with questions and answers for you as we go through tonight. While I'm here, in my role as head of financial aid at the University of Miami, what I'm talking about is really about the entire application process. Whether you're applying to FIU, FAU, Broward College, or University of Miami or not, you're still going through the same process. And we're going to help you identify how that process works this evening. Where we're going to start, and what we advise and what the federal government advises you do, is start with the dependent student. So we'll talk about what it means to be dependent versus independent, but we're going to go through the process with the student beginning the application. That is the best advice. That is going to be what gets you through the process in the smoothest way possible. And so we will step through in that process. Now, where do you go to do this? You go back to that studentaid.gov webpage. So let me reopen up that browser. Let's take a look at the browser together, and I'll walk you through how do you access the FAFSA. So if I go back to studentaid.gov, or if I'm on one of the pages, you'll see that one of the first things you'll notice on the form or on the piece here is this menu that says FAFSA form. So you're going to drop down here and click on complete the FAFSA form. Now, really important, I want to just talk about a couple of things. You will see that if you click on start a new form here, you're doing the 25-26 form. That is the form for students who are enrolling for the current academic year, 25-26. Most of you are not going to have to do a 25-26 form. What you're going to want to do is see this little box up here that says participate in 26-27 FAFSA beta testing. That is the link you want to click on. So be careful, because we've seen families just jump in and not pay attention to these pieces. This is if you're applying for aid for the current academic year. You're going to want to click there, which says participate in 26-27 beta testing. You'll then see an information sheet here about what is beta, why are we doing beta, what is that all about. Right now, beta is open to anyone who wants to participate. That is a change that happened actually earlier this week. So you're just going to click on Start 26-27 form, and you will be able to immediately access the beta. So you'll notice the very first thing it's going to ask you is to provide your login, your email, your phone number, or your username. If you have not created an FSA ID, you can click on Create an Account. But if you have, and hopefully you have, you'll have one. You'll have your combination of username and password. I'm not going to log in because I've already done a FAFSA for this year, but this is the process by which you will log in. So again, if you've already done one, you've already created your FSA ID, you should be able to log in. If you have not yet, you can certainly create an account just by clicking on the button that says create an account. Okay, so once you do, you're going to be brought to this screen. And in our example, we're going to use the example of a student named Raya. Raya is going to be our sample student in this scenario. You'll see Raya is welcome to the form and asked, how is she starting this application? Is she starting as a student or as a parent? And as I said before, we're going to hope to have you start with the student information first. It's much easier if you start with student first. You won't make as many errors, there won't be as many risks. So the strong advice is to start with the student during their section or doing their section first. So Raya is going to click student and click continue. Now, while we're here, I'm going to point out this little thing that says, did you receive an invitation code? Just make note of that. This is where parents, when you come back in later, you will have a code because the student will give you a code, and that's how you access your section. But for right now, that's not going to be important. It's really the student who's going to do their section and click on that continue button. The 4 screens that follow are just quick videos that walk you through some information. You're welcome to watch them. Much of what I'm going to tell you tonight is covered in the videos, plus more. I'll cover more. But you're free to watch these. We're just going to skip through them. They move pretty quickly through. They just provide some content and information for you about how to apply, why you're applying, what it means to apply, and what are the next steps. Okay, the very next page asks to confirm that we've got the right person. So it reminds you, Raya, that you are logged in. It'll have your information, your student information, your date of birth. If you want to change anything here, you cannot change it on here. You have to log into your account settings to do that. But it just confirms that you have the right person logged in, as a reminder that it is your record you are updating. Now, what you'll notice as we go through is a lot of the screens, I'm going to spend a lot of time talking through the students section tonight. Many of the screens you see are going to be exactly the same when we come to the parents section. They look almost exactly the same. So parents, please pay attention too, because you're going to see the same information. I'll address both of you as we go, but keep in mind right now, you're answering questions for the student. So it's the student who's answering these questions, but you'll see the same questions asked when we come to the parents section. So the very first question that a lot of students get confused by is this, not just the state of legal residence, but when they became a resident of their state. So in this case, Raya is answering New York. You'll, of course, answer Florida as your state of legal residence. And when did you become a resident of Florida or New York in her case? It may be the month and year of your birth. If you've always lived in Florida, that would be the time frame, your month and year of birth. If you moved to Florida, it would be the year you moved to Florida and the month. While it's important that you get somewhat close to accurate, what's most important to understand here is that if you lived in Florida for a year, by the time you start college, you qualify for in-state tuition if you go to an in-state public institution in the state of Florida. So this is just a way to see if you qualify for state aid, if you qualify for in-state tuition. It's the beginning of that process, not the end, but it's the beginning of that process. So that's why the question's answered here. It's not so important you get the exact month, but you do want to make sure you have the year proper, especially if it's before 2025. So the next section asks you to provide consent. Consent and approval to get information from the IRS. This is really, really important. If you do not agree to transfer information from the IRS to the FAFSA, you cannot qualify for federal financial aid. If your parents don't agree to transfer their information from the IRS to the FAFSA, they and you cannot qualify for federal financial aid. So while this says this is optional, and indeed it really is, if you say no, if you decline, you will not qualify for any federal financial aid, probably any institutional financial aid or state financial aid either. So it's really important that you accept the conditions. You can see it walks through the consent and approval process. At the very end, there's a button that says approve. If I were to click the button that said decline, I would get a pop-up message that says, are you really sure you want to decline? Here's the repercussions of that. Again, you're going to click approve. What this allows the Department of Education to do is to go to the IRS and pull your information straight down and into the FAFSA. So you don't have to enter that information yourself. So you'll see right on the very next screen, this message that says, we're securely importing your information. This progress bar will move along. And for almost all of you, it will say complete. Now, what if I didn't file a tax return? Do I still have to do this? The answer is yes. So when you give your approval and your consent, not only do you get your tax information, we also look to see, or the Department of Education does, looks to see if there's any record at the IRS. And if there is no record, we're told that too. So at least we can clear your record and move on. So you need to provide that consent so that that screening can be done. So once you provide that, and once we load the information in, you should see a message something like this that says success. We've confirmed your information with the IRS, and you can continue on. If there's some other issue that comes up, if it fails for some reason, may have been a match issue, maybe you typed the wrong date of birth or wrong social security number, there's a way for you to manually enter in the information if it fails, but we're going to assume that your match was successful. Okay, so going on, let's talk about personal circumstances. So you'll notice as we step through the FAFSA that there are multiple places that point you to where we are in the FAFSA process. This is the first one. So the first section is going to be on personal circumstances. If you look at the next screen, you'll see there are 5 sections of the FAFSA. We're doing section number 1, and you can see for students, we'll eventually get to demographics, financials, colleges, and signatures. Those are the 5 sections. Parents have less. We'll see that when we get to your section. The very first question in this section, personal circumstances, is the student's marital status. A reminder, we're talking about the student's marital status. So is the student married? Now you might ask, why are we asking this question, right? How many 17-year-olds are married or 18-year-olds? Reminder that it's not just incoming students to college that complete the FAFSA. Everyone completes the FAFSA. If you're an adult going back to college to finish your undergraduate degree, you might do the FAFSA. If you're a graduate student, you would do the FAFSA. If you're going back from med school, you would do the FAFSA. So it's possible that a student could be married or divorced or remarried or widowed or separated. That's why these questions are here. But for this, we're really looking at the student's marital status. And again, Raya is going to answer single in her situation. The very next page asks about college and career plans. So a couple of things here. Raya is a first-year student. She's never been in college before. Maybe Raya earned dual enrollment credits, or maybe she's graduating with her IB, her International Baccalaureate, or her ACE diploma. She would still be a first-year freshman. So even if you have credits earned that you're bringing with you, unless you're a transfer student from another college or university, you're going to want to answer first-year freshman in this question here. The next question asks, when you start the 26-27 school year, will you already have your first bachelor's degree? Be careful. Lots of students answer this question incorrectly. Remember, a high school diploma is not a bachelor's degree. So if you have your high school diploma only, the answer to that question is no. It's only if you graduated with your actual undergraduate degree that you would say yes there. The very next question asks you about personal circumstances. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit here to help look a little deeper at some of this. And what this particularly is talking about is if you can answer yes to any of these questions, then you'll be what's considered independent as a student, and you won't need parental information. Chances are all of you are going to answer no to all of these questions, but just in case, let's go through them. So number 1, student, are you currently on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces? Are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? Do you have kids of your own that you're supporting and live with you? Now, or since the age of 13, were you an orphan? Were you a ward of the court? Or are you in foster? Were you in foster care? Or are you a legally emancipated minor? Or are you in legal guardianship with someone other than your parent or step-parent? So if any of those are yes, then you'll be considered what's called an independent student. And in that situation, you will not need a parent to fill out your FAFSA with you. But if all of your answers to these questions are no, which is possible, then in that situation, you will likely need parental information. Again, if you can answer yes to any of these, do so. But if the answer to all of these is no, then you would answer none of these apply. Now, some of you may have special circumstances. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, if you do, and how to handle it in that situation. But first, let's look at student homelessness. So the next question you'll be asked is, at any point on or after July 1 of 2025, were you unaccompanied, meaning you do not live with your parents, you don't have your parents with you, and you're either homeless or are you self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? So again, this is not if you're homeless living with your family, but if you're homeless and independent and from your parents, or if you're providing your own support and you're at risk of homelessness, you could answer yes to that question. If you do, there'll be a subsequent question that asks, who's determined that for you? Is that something that a McKinney-Vento agent at your school or your high school has determined? Is that something you're self-determining? Do you need to meet with a financial aid officer? If you can answer yes to that question, you're also independent. So again, if that is the situation for you, answer yes. But in Raya's case, the answer is no. So the next question allows for unusual circumstances. I want to talk a little bit about what we mean by unusual circumstances. So what if all the answers so far have been no, but you're in an unusual situation where maybe you're not in contact with your parents because there's been a breakdown in the relationship, or you're estranged from them, or you're a victim of human trafficking, or you don't know how to locate your parents, or your parents are incarcerated. If any of those are true or other situations, right, you can answer yes to this question, and you'll be considered provisionally independent. You'll be able to complete the application without parental information, but you'll have to follow up with one of the colleges you list to provide documentation to prove your independent status. So again, most of you will answer no here, but there may be situations. For example, we had a situation where a parent lives out of state, the student no longer has contact with that parent, the parent is still living. The student has not been adopted by any other person, but they're living with a relative here in Florida. In that situation, that student would answer yes and provide documentation to the college or university to help prove out the situation. So they're able to document what's going on in that particular situation. Okay, so moving on then, from there, again, Raya is going to answer no. We're now coming to dependency status. So it's pretty clear that this student, that Raya, is a dependent student. That means we're going to need parental information, and that parental information is going to be provided by the parent when we get to that section of the form. Now, there is one last tricky question here, and I want to highlight this question for you. It says, are the parents refusing to provide their information on this FAFSA form? If you're an otherwise dependent student and your parents just flat out refuse to do the FAFSA, you can answer yes here. But what's the impact? Well, the impact is you will only get a small loan from the federal government, and that is it. You won't qualify for any other financial aid. So it's not a great outcome. Very often I'll hear from families, well, I don't want to do the FAFSA because I really can't afford to pay for college. Okay, well, the whole point of doing the FAFSA is to prove that you can't afford to pay for college. So doing the FAFSA helps you as a family document that, helps us as a financial aid officer provide you support. I'll also hear sometimes from families, well, I'm not going to qualify for anything anyway, so why should I bother? But you don't know that until you go through the application process. And just because you might not qualify for federal Pell Grant doesn't mean you might not qualify for other grant or other scholarship funds that the university might offer. Remember, doing the FAFSA begins to open the door for you for all kinds of different financial aid. And there's no obligation by doing a FAFSA that you pay anything. The FAFSA is just the application. No one based on the FAFSA is going to say, you owe us X amount of money. That is really up to you and the student to negotiate. So hopefully you can build against that resistance if your parents or you are resistant to doing the FAFSA, There's no corresponding requirement to pay. We really just need the information to see if you're eligible for financial aid. So we've done the first section of the form, that personal circumstances section. We're now going to move to student demographics, and this also will move pretty quickly through. So the first couple of questions are really just for information purposes that are kept by the department. They're not shared with us. We don't see them at the college or university, but they're really just for tracking purposes. Number one, the first question asks for the student's sex. This is the sex assigned at birth, male or female. Please note, this is not used in any way, shape, or form for federal financial aid or institutional financial aid. We don't even see the answers to this question, but know that the department does require this question to be asked and answered. Similarly, for race and ethnicity, there's a question that's asked about the student's race and ethnicity. Again, we don't see the answers to this question. The department asks you for them for tracking purposes, but we at the college do not see these answers or use them in any way, shape, or form. This one, however, we do need at the college or university, and this asks for your citizenship status. And just a note about this, so a reminder that it's not just US citizens that are eligible for federal financial aid. Non-citizens, called eligible non-citizens, are also eligible for financial aid. If you are not sure what is an eligible non-citizen, maybe you don't, remember, we're talking about here the student's citizenship, not the parent's citizenship, the student's citizenship. If you're not sure who qualifies as a non-citizen, there is a great website at the department, which I'll paste in the chat for you, that has a link and all the information about who qualifies for federal financial aid. If you're a US national or a permanent resident, you have an arrival departure record that has one of these things listed. This is complicated, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through it, but I will say if you, the student, is not a US citizen and you're unsure if you qualify, this is a great place to go to get information about how to determine whether or not you're qualified for federal financial aid. So that would be the best place to go. The next page asks about parents' education status. This is shared with the college or university, but it's to help you identify if there are particular scholarships that we might offer to first-generation students, or if there's a particular program that you might benefit from. So this asks about your parents, whether they attended college or completed a degree. If neither parent attended college, please choose that. And you can see the other answers here, including that one or both parents completed college, or one or both parents attended college but didn't complete. You'll see the options. Just choose the correct option there. The next question asks about parents killed in the line of duty. If you have had the misfortune of having a parent killed in the line of duty, either due to serving in the U.S. Armed Forces post 9/11 or having public duties as a public safety officer, you would answer yes here, and there's some benefits that accrue to you in regard to the Pell Grant, but you'd have to provide some documentation to the college or university. It's unlikely, but this question is here to provide a benefit to those students whose parents were killed in the line of duty. The next series of questions asks about your high school completion. Remember, you're completing this now, but we're planning on you graduating at the end of May or June. So we're going to answer based on what your status will be as of the end of the school year. So Raya is going to graduate with a high school diploma. If you're taking your GED, you would answer there. If you're homeschooled, you'd answer that. But you do have to have a high school completion status at the beginning of the 26-27 school year to qualify for federal financial aid. It's then going to ask you to identify, and I'll magnify this again so you can see it, to identify what high school are you graduating from. So you're going to choose Florida, the city you live in, and you can choose the high school from there directly, or you can just type in the high school directly. That is the other option. Once it finds it, you'll choose the particular high school and click continue, and that will move you on to the next page. You might ask, why is it asking? It's asking because the high school needs to know what percentage of their population have completed the FAFSA. They won't get a list with your name on it, but they will be able to see 25% of our students have completed, 50%, 75%, et cetera. Once you confirm your high school, it'll ask you just to make sure that that is right. You can edit if you made a mistake and go back. You just hit continue, and that moves you on to the next section. So again, I'll remind you, I'll signpost for you. We did personal circumstances. We did student demographics. That is 2 of the 5 sections. So we're already 2/5 of the way through the FAFSA. It moves pretty quickly. And this section's going to move extremely quickly because this is about finances. And one of the benefits of tying the IRS to the FAFSA directly is that it moves very, very quickly through. I'll remind you, I see there's a question that was typed in the chat box. Just a reminder, please, put your questions in the Q&A so we can address them for you if you do have a question. So finances, so let's go through the finances section. So this is going to ask really basically 4 questions. And I'm going to remind parents, these questions are the same questions you're going to see when it comes to your section. And assuming all of your information carried over from the IRS, which it should have, this is the only tax question you're going to need to answer. And most of these won't apply to you. They definitely won't apply to students, but let's look at them if you're a student or a parent, because it'll be the same questions on both sides. Number 1, did you have an IRA, an individual retirement account, that you rolled over from one retirement account to another retirement account? So if you move money between retirement accounts, what happens is you have to take a distribution. It shows up as income, and then you can write off that distribution because you just moved it as a rollover from one program or one plan to another plan. This is asking you to put the amount of that rollover. Most students don't have either IRAs or pensions, so they're going to answer 0. If you can't leave a question blank, so if the answer is 0, please write 0. But again, you should go ahead and make sure that you answer the questions. If you do have an IRA rollover or a pension rollover, you can put the amount of the rollover there. The third question here is one that complicates a lot of families. They get very confused by this. So let me be clear about the third question. This is amount of college grants, scholarships, or AmeriCorps benefits that you report as income. Remember, most scholarships and grants are tax-free, but there may be a situation where if you get a college scholarship, you have to pay taxes on it as part of your income. If that's the case, you put the amount that you paid taxes on in this box. But if you're applying to college for the first time, you're not going to have any scholarship period. You're not going to have a grant period, and you certainly won't have any that's taxable. So the answer is going to be 0 to that third question. It's only in the rare circumstance that you have so much grant that you're paying tax on the portion above tuition, fees, mandatory expenses. It's unlikely you'll have that. So again, for most of you, that answer will be 0. The fourth example here, the foreign earned income exclusion. Let's talk about that for a second. So this only pertains if you, the student, or when we get to the parent, if you, the parent, earn income in a foreign country and pay income tax on that income in a foreign country. So let me give you an example. So let's say I live in Florida, but I work in Mexico. I travel to Mexico and I have a job in Mexico and I earn income in Mexico. And because I'm in Mexico, I'm paying taxes on those earnings in Mexico. The US government allows me to say, well, although I've had that earnings, I don't have to pay taxes on it twice. So I'm going to exclude it from my income for US government purposes. So I'm not doubly taxed for it. But here, because it is income, I would add it back so that on the FAFSA process, it counts it as income. Again, most of you are not going to have this. If you do, you can look at your IRS Form 1040 and see it. But again, for most of you, unless you're working out of country, you're going to have an answer of 0 for that question as well. So now we turn to assets. So those are the only 4 income questions. Now there are 4. Well, in the student case, 3. For parents, there'll be 4. There are 3 asset questions. So again, let's look at these asset questions. We're going to spend a little time on these now because they'll repeat for the parents. Number 1, students, do you have money in cash, savings, or checking accounts? You can see Raya writes down $500. You can also see it says don't include student financial aid or any retirement accounts or any investments on that first line. Notice you're not going to report in retirement accounts anywhere. If you have an account that's specifically designated for retirement, like a 401k or a 403b or an IRA, you're never going to list that amount on this form. You're also not going to list your home. Home, we don't ask for on the FAFSA form. It's not going to be listed. So assets are cash accounts or savings or checking accounts. Investments, including other real estate, would be things other than the home that you live in. So this might include second properties. But this is if you have an asset that that is for a business that is larger than 100 employees. You would include the value of the asset in that business. I am noting, and I'm just going to turn to my peers. I'm getting a message about my internet signal being spotty. So can you just let me know if I'm lagging? That would be helpful. Okay, so those are the asset questions that are asked. That's really it for assets. So we're able to move on now to the next section of the form. So now is where you're going to go ahead and choose what college or university you want to send the FAFSA to. And as a reminder, as I said before, you're going to list every college you're thinking about applying for admission to. You don't have to wait until you apply. So I know, for example, Broward College, if you wanted to apply to Broward, probably doesn't have their admissions application open for next fall, but that's okay. You can go ahead and list them now. If you haven't done your application for the University of Miami, but you know you're going to apply, go ahead and list us now. Same with any of the colleges you're looking at. So we're going to do this fourth section, which is what colleges am I thinking of? So you can look up and list the college by a couple of ways. You can search for them by state. Again, you can search by name of the college. You can look by city, or if you see here, it says enter school code. If you know the college's school code, you can enter the school code directly. And you can list up to 20 colleges on the FAFSA in this first round. Once you choose the school and ignore the fact that obviously this is wrong, there is no Northeastern University in Northridge, California, but this is just an example page. You then will have a list. You can click select for one or two or more than one, and you can list up to 20. Once you hit continue, you can then add more if you need to, select and add more, and you can give as many colleges you need as colleges as you need to. If you're a Florida resident, you should make sure, even if you're not going to apply for admission to one of them, that you list one of the Florida State universities in the mix. So let's say you're only going to apply to Broward College, or you're only going to apply to University of Miami or University of Tampa. You would still want to list FIU or FAU or FSU, because that gets your entry to the state scholarship office. You need to make sure that you do that so that the state scholarship agency has a record for you of your application when they do the state financial aid awarding. You can always go back later and add colleges, universities to your list or remove them. But again, this list is really important to get right now so that you get your application in early. And in fact, if you have more than 20 colleges you're applying to, which some do, I'm not advising it, but some do, right? What you're going to do is list the first 20 with the earliest deadline now, submit your FAFSA, and when you get a confirmation that your FAFSA has been processed, you can go back in and edit your list and replace the first 20 with up to 20 more if you need to do so. So again, that is the process by which you can apply to more schools if you need to do so. Okay, the very next section, so that's it for the school section. We're now going to turn to the almost last section for students, which is inviting your parent to do the FAFSA with you. And to do this, I need to talk about what is a parent. I think you probably think you know what a parent is, but the FAFSA has a different definition. So I'm going to talk about that. And to do this, I'm actually going to open up a link that we'll look at together. And that link is what they call the parent wizard. So let's look at this wizard together. We're going to walk through these steps and we'll talk about sort of the multiple possible situations you may find yourself in. And particularly, this is really important for students who are in divorced or separated families, because it's important to know what parent is it that you'll complete the application with. So in this situation, I'm going to type in my name and my wife's name. It's Daniel, and if I could spell her name right, Rebecca. So these are our students' legal parents, either biological or adoptive parent. So I have a child named Rachel. This is true. Daniel and Rebecca are her parents. So we're going to start with this information. Okay. The very first question asks, are Daniel and Rebecca married to each other, but not separated? So we'll start by saying yes. Okay. So for FAFSA purposes, that means that Daniel and Rebecca are parents on the FAFSA form. If Rebecca and I file our taxes together, only one of us needs to complete the FAFSA. In fact, the student's only going to invite one of us to the FAFSA. They can choose which one of us, either myself or Rebecca, and I will report my marital status as married. And if we file taxes jointly, only one of us is required as contributor, and all the tax information will carry over automatically. If we didn't file taxes together jointly, then both of us will have to be contributors on the FAFSA form. The first parent will do it first, and then that parent will invite their spouse to come back and provide their information. Both parents have to provide approval, and both parents will need to sign the form. But that's only in the case where either we didn't file taxes, or we filed separately, or one of us filed taxes and one of us didn't. But if you file jointly, then only one parent's information will be needed. For any parent that needs to identify as a contributor, they're going to need their own Student Gov account name and password to do their section of the FAFSA form. So that is the situation if we are married to each other. Again, if you have a complicated situation, feel free to ask, but let's look what happens if we aren't married to each other. So let's say Rebecca and I either never got married or we were married, but now we're separated or divorced. The next question asks, do we live together? Well, let's start by saying yes. Although we're not married, we never married, we still live together. We never got married, we never decided to actually do the formal wedding ceremony. In that situation, even though we're unmarried and we're both the student's parents, we still are both parents on the FAFSA form. We still have to complete the form together. If we file taxes jointly, only one of us needs to do it. If we file separately, or one of us files and one of us doesn't, or we both don't file, then both of us need to do the FAFSA form. Okay, so we've talked about married and living together. We've talked about unmarried and living together. What if we're divorced and don't live together? Well, then the question becomes, which parent does the FAFSA form? And in that situation, the question asked is, which parent provided more financial support for the student over the last 12 months? So it's September, right? You would think back over the last 12 months. Remember, it's the student answering this question. You'd think back over the last 12 months, and you would decide which parent is going to be the one who provided more financial support over the last 12 months. And that's the parent you're going to answer the questions about on the FAFSA. So let's say over the last 12 months, Rebecca provided more financial support. Notice this doesn't say who did the student live with. It doesn't ask who claimed the parent on the tax return. It doesn't ask who the student lived with over the last 12 months. It simply asks who provided more financial support. And in that situation, I'm going to answer Rebecca. If both parents provided an equal amount of financial support, or if neither supports the student financially, then it says to choose the parent with a greater income and assets. But in this situation, I'm going to say Rebecca is the one who provided more financial support. Did she remarry? No, she didn't. So in that situation, only she is a parent on the student's FAFSA form. But let's say she did remarry. Well, in that situation, then it's going to be Rebecca and her new spouse that provides information on the FAFSA form. And again, if they file jointly, then only Rebecca needs to contribute. If they file separately, then they both need to contribute. So again, that is how the process works. Now note, this page is not built into the FAFSA. You won't ever see this page on the FAFSA. I took you here as a separate link, and I've pasted that link in the chat. If you have a question, you'll see on the FAFSA form when we get there, and it's just going to repeat what we just went through. There's a link that says, invite your parent to this FAFSA form. Who counts as a parent on the FAFSA form? If you click that link, that will take you right to the wizard that we just went through. So it presumes you know, but if you don't, and you want to click on this information, it will tell you which parent is considered, and you can walk through what we just went through. Once you identify which parent you're going to invite, remember, you're only going to invite one parent to start. You're going to start by putting in the parent's email who you're going to send the invitation to, and click send invite. Once you've done that, an email is immediately generated to the parent. In addition, you'll see a confirmation that that email was sent, and you'll see an invite link, and you'll see a 7 or 8 digit code. In this case, it's a 7-digit code. The capitalization doesn't matter. It could be uppercase or lowercase. This code is a unique code that you, the parent, will use to log in to do your section of the form. This code will be sent to you in the email, but also the student can come back and find this code at any time. If you lose the email, if you don't know, if you can't find it, they can also copy and text you the link. So this information's here to be able to get the parent logged in to do their section of the form. Now, you're not done as a student. This is really important. Don't close the browser. Don't shut it down. You need to sign the application. But that will generate the invite to the parent. And now we're moving to the very last section of the form, which is the signature section. So for signature, it's going to start by giving you a repeat of all the information you've provided, just to confirm. If you click on expand all, you can see it all your answers, or you can go section by section, and it's going to tell you who you invited as a contributor. Click continue, and then it's going to bring you to the signature page. You need to navigate through to the very end, the bottom of that page, click the box and click sign. That is really important. If you close the browser without signing, you have not completed your FAFSA, and it will not submit. You must sign the application to certify that you've done the application. Once you do that, you'll get a message that looks something like this that says pending submission. So you've done your part, student. Now the parent needs to do their part. If, let's say, you chose the wrong parent, or you made a mistake, you need to go back, you can always come back and click manage invitations from here, and it will again allow you to change the email address it was sent to. Maybe you typed the wrong email address. But remember, all you really need is that invite code. That invite code will allow the parent to access it directly. Student, you will get an email that looks something like this, that gives you, actually, sorry, this is on the page itself. This is on the page. You can go through the bottom of the page and see other information. The parent will get an email that looks like this, and that parent will say, please complete your section of blank's FAFSA form. So this is what the email will look like. It will come from the U.S. Department of Education. It'll be addressed to whatever email address you typed in, and you'll see that there is a link that says accept invitation. If you click on that link, that will take you right to your section of the form. You don't need the code, but the code is here in case there's a problem. That will be there for you. And you'll notice that's the code, that 7-digit code that Ryo was provided. Once you click on that link, that will take you to log in parent with your FSA ID and your password. Really important. If you're using the same computer as your student, make sure your student logs out of their application before you log in to your application, right? Don't make that mistake, because if you're both on the same computer and you don't log out, you won't actually get a chance to fill out your section as a parent. You need to make sure that the student is logged out so that you can log in. So parent, if you've never created an account, You can click again that create an account button. And if you have one, you can go ahead and put in your email address and your password. Now, notice it will take you to this accept a FAFSA invitation link. Hopefully, that invitation code will already be entered in there. If it is not, you can go ahead and type it in from the email you got. But in most cases, it will already be entered for you. And once you say, yes, that is me, they'll ask you to confirm that you really are going to share your information with the student. You can go ahead and click yes, I accept. So there's a frequently asked questions section that answers why are you invited? What do I have to do? Does it mean I have to pay for college? We've talked about much of this. And then you're going to see much of these questions, many of these questions look exactly the same as the student section. So there's the first, second, third, and fourth video screens, as I showed you before. There's the confirmation page to confirm your identity information, as we talked about before. Here's the consent page. We did this before too, where you're going to agree as a parent to provide consent to share information from the IRS. You're going to click agree. And you'll see again that your information is imported into the system and confirmed that the information has been received. So we're going to jump in, and the parent section is much shorter. There are only 3 sections. Starts with parent demographics. So first, parents, you're going to be asked, what is your marital status? So let's say you might be widowed, or you might be separated or divorced or remarried. If any of those situations are the case, or maybe you're single and you never married, here's where the parent's going to provide their marital status. So again, remember, this is the parent that was invited to complete the FAFSA by their student, the parent who is the parent of record. They're going to provide their marital status and click continue. They're going to answer questions about their state of legal residence. So much like the student answered this question, parents will as well. Again, most important, you choose the right year. The month is important, but more important that as long as it's been over a year, the year is more important. For parents, it may be the month and year you moved to Florida, if you weren't born in Florida. That's it for the parent demographics section. We're going to move to parent finances. Again, this moves very quickly. We've talked about much of this. The very first question's going to ask you about specialized programs that you may have benefit from. If you as a parent or anyone in your family received earned income credit, federal housing assistance for your reduced price lunch, Medicaid, CHIP, SNAP, SSI, etc., click the program or programs that you received. The reason they're asking for this is there's some special treatment for financial analysis that comes if you have one of these programs. So if you do, please check it. If not, click none of the above. The next question asks about family size. Family size is going to be immediately taken from the tax return, but it may be possible that things have changed since your taxes. Keep in mind, when you file for 26-27, the tax return we're looking at is the 2024 tax return. So we're going to pull income from your 2024 tax return. Well, what if you've had a child since then? So maybe in 2024, there were 4 in the family, but now because there's a new birth, there's actually 5 in the family, right? In that situation, what would you do? Well, you have the option of updating your family size, and that option is here. For most of you, you won't need to, because the family size will match what was on the tax return, and it will tell you what the assumptions have been made about the family. But if you need to change them, you can change it by answering yes and providing the number of children or other dependents who live with the parent and get more than half of their support. Again, many of you are just going to answer no and be able to move on. But if it is different, maybe there's an older sibling who no longer is part of the family because they've moved off on their own and they're self-sufficient now. So in this situation, that's what's happened with Raya's family. Raya's family was 4 in 2024, but it looks like a sibling is now no longer needed in the family size, so they've brought it down to 3. The next question, although it's not used for any financial aid purpose, it does ask, of those people in your family, how many are going to be in college in the coming year? This is really informational only, but they do ask that you answer this question. so the college understands what pressures you might be facing financially as you're trying to put more than one person through college. The next page asks, again, these same four questions we looked at before. So the IRA rollover, the pension rollover, the taxable scholarship, and the foreign earned income exclusion. We talked about all of those when we looked at the student section. And remember I said there were four asset questions on the parent side. The major change here is there is a question about annual child support received. So if you receive child support as a parent, you're going to put the amount you received in the last complete calendar year. So today we're in 2025. So you would put the amount of child support you received as a parent in 2024. We're not counting as an income source, we're counting as an asset source. But what was the amount of that child support? Not how much was owed to you, but how much was actually paid in 2024. Otherwise, the asset questions are exactly the same: cash savings checking, net worth of investments, and business and investment farms. Parent, you're almost done. The very last thing you need to look at is if there is a second parent's information required. So let's imagine in scenario one that the parent doesn't file taxes, or they file taxes separately, or they filed married, filing separately, or head of household. In that situation, you might have to invite a spouse to be on the form as well. So it's unlikely, but if you don't file jointly, this is what you'll see. So it'll ask you to name the second spouse, and much like we just did, that second spouse will be sent their own invitation with their own 7-digit code. You'll see it here, 7 or 8-digit code, and they can log in and do their section of the form. So if you file separately or don't file, either of you, you'll see that process. That is scenario number one. If, on the other hand, there's no scenario, there's no information required, all you're going to see is this, which basically says, based on your responses, we need to know your spouse's date of birth. Why do we ask about that? So if you file taxes jointly, we already have your spouse's name, that came from the IRS. We already have their social security number, that came from the IRS. What we need is their date of birth, because there's certain parts of the analysis that require the age of the older parent. You've told us your date of birth when you registered for an FSA ID. We need the spouse's date of birth so we know which one of you is older and can figure out that information. That is all the information needed if you file jointly, and then that is done. So either you'll have to provide the email address, or you'll have to provide the date of birth of the spouse if you're married and filing as parent one. Remember, you're not done until you sign. So much like we saw this before, you can see there's a summary section here. You can go through and expand and view what's there, and you'll be taken to the summary section where you're going to click yes, I agree, click sign, and that will submit the application. So once you've done that, if there's no parent two required, then that will go ahead and complete the FAFSA. If there's a parent two information required, then that parent two will have to do their section before the FAFSA is complete. But once that's done, parent one or parent two if necessary, you'll see a message that says, congratulations, the FAFSA form is complete. And that really takes us to the end of the formal presentation. I will say there's one other piece that I do want to highlight for you, and that is a potential benefit for you if you actually do the FAFSA application with us. We have a limited number of Amazon gift certificates, certificates to award to students who do their FAFSA. So what we're asking you to do, and I've put the link in the chat, is once you submit your FAFSA application, meaning both you, the student, and your parent, you'll get an email from the Department of Education that says, we've received your FAFSA form. If you go through and complete this form, we will in turn award you, while funds are available, an Amazon gift card to thank you for your effort, and you can use that in any way you would like to. Colleen, you can remind me the dollar amount of that gift card. I don't want to speak the wrong amount. But if you provide your email, your last name, and it is limited to one per household, you can go ahead and put your information in here, and we will then turn around and send you that gift card by email. It may take us a couple of days to do so, but that is our thanks to you for going through and doing the process. We will do this until we run out of funds. But that is, again, a nice sweetener to help you go ahead and do the FAFSA and make sure that you are the first in line for your financial aid. It might help to pay for part of a college textbook or for some other resource as you go through. So with that, that really takes us through the presentation. I am happy if there are questions that have come up that we want to address as a group. I'm also happy to answer your questions if you want to type in the Q&A. I want to thank our presenters behind the scenes who've done a great job of answering questions as we've gone through tonight, but see if there are questions that we can answer for you as we are here. So I'll pause for a second and see if folks have questions.
We had one question in the chat, Daniel. This was trying to go back to the actual part of the presentation, but the question was, what if you're a college student? What do you choose? I think this was Javencia or Javency. If you
And
wouldn't
I'm
mind.
guessing, yeah, absolutely. I'm guessing that that may be around the year in school question. I think I saw that flash by too. So if that's about year in school, it's going to be whatever year you're going to be in the school year. So it's either first year freshman, second year sophomore, other undergraduate, junior or senior. The reason that's important is because, and I can share that page. Reason that's important is because loan limits are based on what year in school you are. So if you're indeed coming through as an upper class student, you want to be able to put in what year it is you are attending. If this is the page that the question was on and you're a sophomore, you want to answer second year sophomore, etc. So just keep that in mind. If you're coming into a graduate program, you want to answer graduate program, not if that's what you want to do eventually, but literally you are starting your graduate program. You want to answer graduate program. But otherwise, most of you on this call will answer first year freshman. I think that was the question. There was also a question I saw about what if I get my AA by the time I graduate high school? What do I put here? I would still say first year freshman. Just because you have your AA doesn't mean the college is going to consider you a junior. If they do, they can make that change themselves on the FAFSA as a correction. So I would specifically, again, look to answer this as a first year freshman otherwise. Okay, so there's a thank you, Kelsey, for answering this question, but I'll also highlight it. The question asked, let's say my parents never married, but my contributor, my dad, has a spouse, my stepmother. Is he considered remarried? The answer is yes. They'd be considered remarried or married, either one of those, but yes. And it would be, again, your father and stepmother who would be answering the questions on the FAFSA. Other questions that you're seeing or comments? Okay, let me just say one more word. Thank you. Tron, yeah, that link that I sent was for everyone, not just for panelists. So if you can correct that, that'd be great. So I just want to say, since we completed this, what do we have left to do on October 1st? Great question. So let me share, some institutions may have other applications that they require, not just the FAFSA. And I'll address this way. At the University of Miami, we actually have a second application that we require you to do for consideration for our financial aid. And that application is called the CSS Financial Aid Profile. So I'm going to share my screen and just take you to that page. So if you're unsure if your college has other forms they might require, you may want to take a look at their individual webpage to see if there are other forms that might be required for their financial aid. The main secondary form that many institutions do require is the CSS Financial Aid Profile. I will paste a link to that in the chat. If you're unsure, if you pull down this first bar and say, is it required for domestic US students, for entering students, and you click yes, it will filter the list, and you can filter by state. So let's look, for example, at Florida. In Florida, University of Miami is the only school that requires the CSS profile. This College of Administration of Tampa Bay does, but we do require the CSS profile. It helps us determine who to give our financial aid to. But let's say you're applying to schools in Massachusetts. You'll notice that a number of schools in Massachusetts, including Northeastern, Smith, Wellesley, Tufts, Worcester Polytech, Boston College, Boston University, Harvard, you name it, Bentley, Babson, they all require the CSS profile. So if you have done your FAFSA, you may want to keep an eye on the CSS profile to see which institutions need the CSS profile. You can go ahead and sign in and start that application now. It is open. It's a little more complicated. There is no automatic loading of the IRS information, so you may need to have your tax form in front of you when you do the application. So just to be aware of that. I think I saw a question about Broward. Did you address that question, Tron? There's a chat that disappeared.
I did not, and it disappeared. You're right.
Okay. Let's see what other questions there are. Okay, so that's a good question. If both parents are unavailable and the student depends totally on the grandmother has to sign the form. Is that correct? Well, that depends. So let me address this. It's a great question, and thank you for asking it. Depends on the current legal status of that grandmother. If the grandmother has adopted the child legally, then she is considered parent for the purposes of the FAFSA. If she is not, and I'm guessing she has not, then and there is no legal guardian, she's not in legal guardianship, then we're going to be back to that provisionally independent status that we talked about. And I can bring that back up and show you the answer to the question, particularly that we talked about earlier. And that is in a situation where the student has unusual circumstances. So in that situation, you would answer yes if that is the situation, if the student's estranged from his or her parents, and you'd have to provide documentation to the college about what's going on. We don't like to have you relive trauma. It's not our intention, but we're required by the federal government to correct documentation about why and what the situation may be. So that is why you would be required to provide documentation. That documentation usually includes a letter from the student, as well as an independent third party, plus whatever other documentation, legal or otherwise, might be able to be provided. A school counselor note is very helpful. Sometimes a note from a minister or a rabbi or a priest who knows the family, or a therapist who knows the family situation, could be helpful as well. So I don't want to belabor this. I want to give you your evening back, but I also want to make sure that we're here to answer questions as you need them. If you feel like you are good to go, you are good to go. I would please suggest you go ahead and complete the FAFSA as soon as possible. If you have questions, feel free to reach back. We will post a copy of the recording on our YouTube channel. Let me get you to navigate to that YouTube channel before you run to make sure that I show you how to find us. So if you go to YouTube, we have a wonderful YouTube channel, if I can type the word YouTube properly, which is going to be my bane of my existence. Here we go. So if you go to the YouTube channel, you're going to look for Bridge to Life South Florida. I will copy and paste this link into the chat for you. This YouTube channel is where we post all of our recordings. So feel free to come back to the channel, and you can go ahead and find the recordings as we post them. You'll see our past recordings, but you'll find one there, I'm sure, in the next day or so. Once you've done your FAFSA, you need to wait for the college to go through their process. That could take months. Remember, the college needs to admit you. They won't send you anything generally until you've been admitted to say what your financial aid is. But again, you want to check with the college to find out if any other information is required. The CSS profile, perhaps a copy of your tax return, perhaps other information. So just check with the college to see if any other information is required. But you should be done at this point. And good luck in the search process and the application process. I hope tonight was helpful. Thank you again to the folks from FIU, FAU, Broward, and others who were able to help us this evening. Really appreciate your assistance. And I will close this out with a little bit of music as we get ready to shut down tonight. Thank you again for being with us. We really appreciate you spending some time with us and learning about the FAFSA. And we will see you soon. Have a great evening, everyone.